Taman stood on the observation deck of the starship Radiance, watching the stars slip past in streams of light. His crystalline skin shifted from calm blue to uncertain purple as he read the orders again. 3 humans were being assigned to his reconnaissance unit. He had never worked with humans before. The Galactic Coalition had maintained peace for over 300 years. 47 different species lived together in harmony, sharing knowledge and resources. The Valkyrians, Taman's people, were proud members of this great alliance. They believed in diplomacy, in careful thought, in solving problems without violence. Humans had joined the coalition only 80 years ago. They were the newest members, and many of the older species looked down on them. Humans were strange. They ate the flesh of animals. They told stories about wars and battles. They laughed when things were dangerous. Taman had heard all the rumors, but he tried to keep an open mind. The door slid open behind him. Taman turned and saw 3 humans entering the observation deck. They wore simple gray uniforms with minimal insignia. The first was a woman with dark hair pulled back tightly. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the room. The second was a man who carried himself with quiet authority. The third was older, with lines on his face and gray in his hair. "Commander Taman?" the woman asked. Her voice was flat, professional. "Yes, you must be the human advisors." Taman's skin flickered polite green. "Sergeant Hana," the woman said, not offering her hand. She gestured to the others. "Lieutenant J1, Medic Duxu. Welcome aboard the Radiance," Taman said. He tried to smile the way humans did, but it felt awkward on his crystalline features. "I must admit, we have never worked with humans before. Your reputation is interesting." Duxu, the older one, smiled slightly. "Interesting. That's a polite word for it." "We are traveling to the outer colonies," Taman explained. "There have been reports of unknown ships in the sector. The Coalition wants us to investigate. It should be a simple reconnaissance mission. We observe, we report, we leave. No conflict expected." "No conflict expected," J1 repeated slowly. Something in his tone made Taman uncomfortable, though he could not say why. The humans settled into their quarters without complaint. Over the next few days, Taman watched them carefully. They were polite to the Valkyrian crew but kept mostly to themselves. They spent hours in the training room, running through exercises that seemed excessive for a simple reconnaissance mission. One evening, Taman entered the training room and found Hana practicing combat drills. She moved through a series of strikes and blocks, fighting an invisible enemy. Her movements were efficient, precise, and brutal. There was no wasted motion, no flourish. Every strike was designed to kill. "You train for close combat?" Taman asked. "Our sensors and weapons operate at great distance. Hand-to-hand fighting is rarely necessary." Hana stopped and looked at him. Sweat ran down her face. "Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst." "But the mission parameters suggest—" "Parameters change," Hana interrupted. She picked up a towel. "We've learned to be ready for anything." Later, Taman found the 3 humans in the common area. They were sharing a meal and talking quietly. As he approached, he heard J1 speaking. "Rules of engagement?" J1 asked Hana. "You know the answer," she replied. J1 nodded. Duxu said nothing, just continued eating. The exchange lasted only seconds, but something about it made Taman's skin flash nervous yellow. There was meaning in those few words, an understanding between them that he could not grasp. "May I join you?" Taman asked. "Of course," J1 said, gesturing to an empty seat. "We were just discussing the mission." "What did you mean about rules of engagement?" Taman asked. The 3 humans exchanged glances. Finally, Duxu spoke. "It means we understand what we might need to do if things go wrong." "But nothing will go wrong," Taman said. "This is a peaceful reconnaissance. The Coalition has protocols for every situation." "Protocols are good," Hana said, "until they're not enough." Taman wanted to argue, to explain how the Coalition had maintained peace for centuries through careful planning and diplomatic solutions. But something in Hana's eyes stopped him. She had seen something he had not. All 3 of them had. The Radiance reached the outer colonies 5 days later. The first sign of trouble came when they detected debris in orbit around the colony world. Taman's commanding officer, Admiral Velra, studied the sensor readings with growing concern. "That debris, those are ships," she said. "Coalition vessels destroyed." The communication officer tried to contact the colony below. Only static answered. They tried again, nothing. Send a probe, Admiral Velra ordered. Visual confirmation. The probe descended through the atmosphere and transmitted images back to the ship. What they saw made Taemin's skin flash white with shock. The colony was burning. Cities were reduced to rubble. And moving through the ruins were creatures unlike anything in the Coalition database. They were massive, easily twice the height of a Valkyrian. Their bodies seemed to be part biological, part mechanical. As the probe watched, one of the creatures tore through a building with its bare hands, searching for survivors. What are they? Someone whispered. Admiral Velra immediately sent an emergency message to Coalition Command. The response came within hours. These creatures were called the Ravagers. They were a nomadic species that consumed entire worlds, stripping them of resources and life. They had never entered Coalition space before. Now they were here. Coalition Command ordered all available ships to rendezvous at the colony world of Mathara Prime. The Ravagers had attacked there as well, but the planet still had 17 million people alive on the surface. A fleet was being assembled to rescue them and drive the Ravagers back. This will be the Coalition's first major military action in over a century, Admiral Velra announced to the crew. We will meet this threat with the full force of our alliance. We have superior numbers and technology. The battle will be difficult, but we will prevail. Taemin noticed the humans standing at the back of the briefing room. They were not celebrating or confident like the Valkyrian officers. Instead, they stood quietly, faces serious. Hana caught his eye and held his gaze for a moment. Her expression said everything. This is going to be worse than you think. The Radiants joined the Coalition fleet 3 days later. Taemin had never seen so many ships in one place. Vessels from dozens of species, all converging on Mathara Prime. The Ravager fleet was visible on sensors, orbiting the besieged planet. The Coalition outnumbered them 2-1. Admiral Velra gave a stirring speech about justice and protection. The other Coalition officers nodded in agreement, confident in their numerical superiority and technological advantage. War was a mathematical equation to them. More ships plus better weapons equaled victory. But Taemin looked at the humans again. Jaewon had his arms crossed, jaw tight. Doksu was checking his medical supplies for the third time, and Hana stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the display showing the enemy fleet. You don't think we'll win? Taemin said quietly, moving to stand beside her. We'll win, Hana replied. The question is what it will cost. But we have more ships, better shields. They don't care about shields or numbers, Hana interrupted. Look at their formation. Look at how they position themselves. They're not trying to win a battle. They're trying to kill as many of us as possible before they die. Taemin looked at the sensor display again. He saw what Hana meant. The Ravager ships were not arranged for optimal tactical advantage. They were arranged for maximum impact at close range. They fight to the death, Hana said softly. Every single one of them. No retreat, no surrender. Your people have never faced an enemy like this. And humans have? Taemin asked. Hana finally looked at him. Yes, we've faced enemies like this many times. The worst enemy we ever faced fought exactly this way. She paused. It was us. We fought ourselves for thousands of years. The battle alarm sounded throughout the ship. Crew members rushed to their stations. Taemin felt his skin cycling through colors. Blue, purple, yellow, white. Fear, uncertainty, and determination all mixing together. The humans walked calmly toward their assigned positions. No rushing, no panic. Doksu went to the medical bay. Jaewon headed to engineering support. And Hana went to her combat station, checking her weapons with practiced ease. Hana, Taemin called out. She stopped and looked back. Will we survive this? She considered the question carefully. Some of us will. That's how war works. The trick is making sure it's as many as possible. Then she was gone, and Taemin was left standing alone as the ship moved into battle formation. For the first time in his life, he understood that all the diplomatic training, all the careful protocols, all the centuries of peace had not prepared the Coalition for what was coming. The humans knew. They had always known. And now the rest of them were about to learn. The space battle began exactly as Admiral Velra predicted. The Coalition fleet opened fire at maximum range, their advanced weapons striking the Ravager ships with precision. Shields flared and hulls buckled under the assault. On the tactical display, Taemin watched 3 enemy vessels go dark within the first minutes. Excellent, Admiral Velra announced from the command deck. Maintain formation and continue firing. Their ships are no match for our technology. Taemin stood at his sensor station monitoring the enemy movements. Something felt wrong. The Ravagers were not attempting evasive maneuvers. They were not returning fire with their full strength. Instead, they were accelerating forward, driving directly toward the coalition lines. "Admiral," Taemin called out. "The enemy ships are closing distance rapidly. They appear to be..." The first Ravager ship rammed into a coalition cruiser at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a brilliant flash. Debris scattered across space. The shockwave rocked nearby ships. "Collision!" someone shouted. "They deliberately crashed into the Meridian." Before anyone could respond, 2 more Ravager ships did the same thing. They ignored the weapons fire tearing through their hulls and drove themselves like missiles into coalition vessels. More explosions, more casualties. "Fall back," Admiral Velra ordered. All ships increased distance, but the Ravagers kept coming. They used their damaged ships as weapons, accepting total destruction to take coalition vessels with them. It was not tactics. It was not strategy. It was pure calculated suicide. Taemin had studied every major conflict in coalition history. No species fought like this. No one threw away their lives so freely. His skin flashed white with horror as he realized what Hana had meant. These creatures did not care about surviving. They only cared about killing. The coalition fleet scattered, trying to maintain distance. The numerical advantage meant nothing if every Ravager ship could take a coalition vessel with it. Ship captains hesitated, uncertain how to fight an enemy with no regard for self-preservation. Then the boarding pods launched. "Incoming projectiles," the sensor officer reported. "They are launching hundreds of small craft." The pods slammed into coalition ships like bullets. They burned through hulls and released their cargo. Ravager soldiers, if they could be called that. Taemin watched the security feeds in horror. The creatures were nightmares made real, biomechanical horrors that moved with terrifying speed. The Radiance shuddered as 3 pods struck the lower decks. Alarms screamed throughout the ship. Security teams rushed to contain the breach, but their training was for crowd control and minor disputes, not combat against creatures designed for killing. "All hands. This is the Admiral." Velra's voice came over the communication system. Her usual calm was strained. "We are being boarded. Security teams, engage the intruders. All other personnel, evacuate to safe zones." Taemin grabbed his sidearm and ran toward the breach site. He had trained with weapons, but never fired one outside of practice. The corridor ahead was filled with smoke and flashing lights. He could hear the sounds of fighting, weapons fire, screaming, and something worse. A wet, tearing sound that made his crystalline skin crawl. He found the security team pinned down at an intersection. 6 Valkyrians were taking cover behind blast doors, firing at something around the corner. Their squad leader, Officer Yunji, waved at Taemin. "Stay back," she shouted. "There are at least 10 of them." "They keep coming." Taemin pressed himself against the wall and risked a look. A Ravager soldier was advancing down the corridor, absorbing weapons fire that would have killed any coalition species. Its body regenerated as quickly as it was damaged. Behind it, more were coming. "We cannot stop them," Yunji said, her skin flashing panic white. "Protocol says we should fall back and seal the sector." "But there are crew members still back there," Taemin protested. "I know, but we cannot help them if we die here." The Ravager rounded the corner and Yunji gave the order to retreat. The security team fell back in formation exactly as they had been trained. Organized, professional. They sealed the blast door behind them, trapping everyone on the other side with the Ravagers. Taemin felt sick. This was protocol. This was how they had been taught. Save who you can, minimize losses, maintain order. But it felt wrong to abandon people to those monsters. "Move to the next defensive position," Yunji ordered. "We need to..." A burst of weapons fire came from behind the Ravagers. The lead creature jerked and stumbled. More fire, concentrated and precise. One of the Ravagers fell. Then another. 3 humans appeared in the corridor, moving forward while the Valkyrian security team had been retreating. Hana led the way, her rifle firing in short, controlled bursts. Beside her, a young human named Kyung-soo provided covering fire. Jae-won moved on the other side, already reloading his weapon with smooth efficiency. They were not running. They were attacking. Taemin watched in shock as the humans advanced into the kill zone. They used the walls for cover, moving from position to position with practiced ease. When a Ravager charged at Hana, she dropped her rifle and drew a knife, meeting the creature head-on. The fight was brutal and quick. She stabbed it repeatedly in what must have been vital areas, her movements economical and deadly. Kyung-soo's rifle overheated from sustained fire. Without hesitation, he swung it like a club, using the heavy weapon to smash a Ravager backward. Jae-won shot the creature while it was off balance. What terrified Tae-min most was their faces. The humans were not angry. They were not afraid. They were calm, almost peaceful, as they systematically killed every Ravager in the corridor. This was not emotional violence. This was professional butchery. Within minutes, the hallway was clear. All 10 Ravagers lay dead or dying. The humans quickly checked each body, firing additional shots to ensure nothing would get back up. Corridor secure, Hana reported into her communicator. Her voice was steady, as if she had just completed a routine task. Continuing sweep of Deck 7, she noticed Tae-min and the security team standing frozen at the sealed blast door. "You should unseal that," she said, pointing at the door. "There might be survivors on the other side, but..." "The protocol," Eunji stammered. "Your protocol got people killed," Hana said flatly. "Ours got them saved. Your choice." She moved on without waiting for a response. Jae-won paused long enough to nod at Tae-min, then followed. Kyung-soo was already around the next corner, rifle ready. Tae-min unsealed the blast door with shaking hands. They found 12 crew members huddled in a storage room, alive because the humans had not followed protocol. Because they had attacked instead of retreating. Over the next hour, the pattern repeated throughout the Radiance. Valkyrian security teams fell back according to their training. Human teams advanced, hunting the Ravagers through the ship's corridors. They took casualties. Tae-min saw Doksu treating wounded humans in makeshift medical stations, but they never stopped pushing forward. In one section, Tae-min came across a scene that would haunt him for years. A Ravager berserker had cornered him in a maintenance bay. The creature was massive, even larger than the soldiers. Tae-min's weapon had run out of charge. He backed against the wall as the Ravager raised its claws to kill him. Hana hit the creature from the side, tackling it away from Tae-min. She had no weapon, just her hands and determination. The fight was vicious. The Ravager was stronger, but Hana was faster. She used its own momentum against it, gouging at vulnerable spots, targeting joints and sensory organs. She took damage. Tae-min saw the creature's claws open deep cuts in her armor and flesh, but she never stopped. When she got an opening, she pulled a breaching charge from her belt, jammed it into the Ravager's torso, and rolled away. "Run!" she shouted at Tae-min. They ran. The explosion behind them was deafening. When Tae-min looked back, he saw Hana grinning despite her injuries. The adrenaline high made her eyes bright, her movements energized. She had just fought a monster hand-to-hand and won, and some part of her had enjoyed it. That was when Tae-min truly understood. Humans had not just learned how to fight. They had evolved for it. 10,000 years of warfare against themselves had shaped them into something the peaceful coalition species could barely comprehend. Violence was not foreign to them. It was a tool they had mastered and controlled. "You okay?" Hana asked, pulling Tae-min to his feet. "You saved my life," he managed to say. "Yeah. Try not to make it a habit." Doksu appeared around the corner, medical kit in hand. He took one look at Hana's injuries and shook his head. "You need to stop tackling things twice your size. Where's the fun in that?" Hana replied, wincing as he began treating her wounds. By the time the Radiance was cleared, the space battle was over. The Coalition fleet had won technically. The Ravagers had been driven back. But the cost was horrifying. Nearly half the Coalition ships were destroyed or crippled. Thousands of crew members were dead. The victory felt hollow. Admiral Velra called a meeting of senior officers. Her crystalline features were dim, exhausted. "We won the space battle, but the situation on Mathera Prime has deteriorated. 17 million civilians are still on the planet with Ravager ground forces. We need to evacuate them." "How?" someone asked. "We barely survived this battle. The Ravagers now outnumber our remaining ships." Silence filled the conference room. Tae-min looked around at the Coalition officers. The dropship shook violently as it descended through Mathera Prime's atmosphere. Tae-min gripped his seat harness, his crystalline skin flashing between blue and yellow. Around him, the human soldiers sat calmly, checking their weapons and equipment one final time. He had volunteered to accompany the human ground teams as a liaison. Admiral Velra had tried to talk him out of it, but Tae-min insisted. He needed to understand these humans better. He needed to see how they fought. The pilot, A human woman named Young Mi called back from the cockpit. 2 minutes to landing zone. Looks hot down there. Taman knew what hot meant in military terms. Enemy presence, danger. The Velkarian forces had landed 3 hours ago at a different location. They were working to establish secure perimeters and evacuation points, moving carefully and methodically. They had rescued 40,000 civilians so far. The humans were taking a different approach. "Listen up," J1 said, standing in the center of the dropship. "Intel shows a Ravager supply depot 3 kilometers from our landing zone. We take it out, we slow their operations in this entire sector. Fast in, fast out. Questions?" No one had questions. Taman wanted to ask many things. Like how 7 humans and 1 Velkarian could possibly assault a fortified position. Like why they did not wait for support. Like why they seemed so calm about what looked like a suicide mission. But he stayed quiet. He would see for himself. The dropship landed hard in a ruined plaza. The back ramp dropped and the humans moved out in formation. Taman followed, struggling to keep up with their pace. The city around them was destroyed. Buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky. Fires burned in the distance. And everywhere there were bodies. Hana led the way, moving from cover to cover with practiced efficiency. The other humans followed her lead, spacing themselves out to minimize casualties from explosions. They communicated with hand signals, barely speaking. Taman realized they had done this so many times that words were unnecessary. They encountered their first Ravager patrol after 10 minutes. 6 creatures moving down a shattered street. Hana raised her fist and everyone froze. She used hand signals to position her team. 2 humans circled around to flank. The others took firing positions. The attack was sudden and brutal. Concentrated fire dropped 3 Ravagers in seconds. The others charged forward, but the humans were ready. Kyung-soo triggered a trap, an improvised explosive made from scavenged materials. The blast took out 2 more. Doksu shot the last one before it could close distance. "Clear," Hana whispered. "Keep moving." The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. 6 enemy soldiers dead, 0 human casualties. They did not stop to celebrate or even confirm the kills. They just moved on, leaving the bodies behind. Taman had trained in combat tactics, but this was something else. The humans fought like a single organism, each person anticipating the other's movements. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. Just smooth, lethal efficiency. They reached the supply depot an hour later. It was a converted warehouse crawling with Ravagers. Taman counted at least 30 on the exterior guards alone. There were probably more inside. "This is insane," Taman whispered to J1. "We should call for backup." "No time," J1 replied, studying the facility through his scope. "By the time backup arrives, they'll have moved their supplies. We hit them now while we know where they are. But there are only 8 of us." J1 looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile. "Exactly. They'll never expect an attack from such a small force. Surprise is worth more than numbers." Hana gathered everyone for a quick briefing. Using a small data pad, she sketched out the facility layout based on what they could see. "Kyung-soo, Boram, you take the north entrance. Plant charges on their fuel storage. Doksu, Taman, you're with me on the south side. We find their command center and neutralize it. J1, you provide overwatch and cover our escape." "Wait," Taman interrupted. "You are dividing our already small force?" "Multiple targets," Hana explained patiently. "We can't kill all 30 Ravagers, but we can make them panic. Create chaos. Make them think they're facing a much larger force. By the time they organize, we'll be gone." It was madness. It went against every tactical principle Taman had learned. You maintained unit cohesion. You never divided your forces when outnumbered. You fought from positions of strength. But the humans were not fighting to hold ground. They were fighting to hurt the enemy and survive. The attack began at Hana's signal. Explosions rocked the north side of the facility as Kyung-soo's charges went off. Ravagers rushed toward the blast, shouting in their harsh language. In the confusion, Hana led Taman and Doksu through a gap in the south wall. Inside, the facility was a maze of containers and equipment. They moved quickly and quietly, killing any Ravagers they encountered before they could raise an alarm. Hana used a knife more than her rifle, silent kills that left no evidence until it was too late. Taman watched her work with a mix of horror and fascination. This was not the scared soldier he had expected. This was a predator in her element, every movement purposeful and deadly. She knew exactly where to strike, how to kill efficiently and quietly. They found the command center in the facility's core. 3 Ravager officers were coordinating their forces, trying to respond to the attack on the north side. They never saw Hana and Doksu enter. The fight was over in seconds. "Plant the charges," Hana ordered, covering the door. Taemin helped Doksu set explosive charges throughout the command center. His hands shook as he worked, but the human medic was perfectly calm. This was just another mission for him. Another target. Another day of survival. "Done," Doksu said. Timers set for 3 minutes. They ran. Behind them, Ravagers were finally realizing the attack was not just on the north side. Alarms blared. Weapons fire chased them through the facility. A bullet ricocheted off Taemin's shoulder armor, spinning him around. Doksu grabbed him and kept him moving. They burst out of the facility just as the charges detonated. The explosion was massive, much larger than Taemin expected. The entire building collapsed inward, taking dozens of Ravagers with it. Secondary explosions followed as stored fuel and ammunition cooked off. Young Mi brought the dropship in low and fast. The humans piled aboard, dragging Taemin with them. As they lifted off, Taemin looked back at the destroyed facility. One small team had done that. 7 humans had crippled an enemy strongpoint that would have taken coalition forces days to assault properly. "Good work," Jaewon said over the communication channel. "Rally point in 10 minutes. We have 3 more targets today, 3 more. They were going to do this 3 more times." Taemin felt exhausted just from one operation, but the humans looked ready to continue. This was normal for them. Multiple missions, constant danger, no rest. Over the next 3 weeks, Taemin witnessed the full scope of human warfare. They did not fight battles. They fought campaigns of terror and confusion. They struck targets deep behind enemy lines, destroying supplies, killing officers, and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. The Valkyrian forces advanced slowly and carefully, securing territory and evacuating civilians from safe zones. They rescued tens of thousands. The humans rescued hundreds of thousands, reaching civilians in areas the Valkyrians could not safely access. They went into the worst situations, the most dangerous zones, and pulled people out through sheer determination and violence. One operation burned itself into Taemin's memory. They found a small village that had been overrun. Intel suggested the civilians were dead, but Hana insisted on checking. They crept into the village at night and found something worse than death. The Ravagers had set up processing pens. They were keeping the villagers alive, slowly harvesting them for biomass. Men, women, and children locked in cages, waiting their turn to be consumed. Taemin stood frozen, staring at the nightmare before him. His training had not prepared him for this. The Coalition had protocols for combat, for diplomacy, for rescue operations. But nothing in their centuries of peace had prepared them for industrial-scale atrocity. "We call for support," Taemin whispered. "We do this properly with adequate forces." "No time," Hana interrupted. She was already moving, knife in hand. "By the time support arrives, they'll be dead. We end this now." What followed was not a battle. It was an execution. The humans moved through the facility like vengeful spirits, killing every Ravager they found. No mercy, no hesitation. These creatures had crossed a line, and the humans responded with overwhelming violence. Taemin found himself fighting alongside them. Something had broken inside him when he saw those cages. The careful diplomatic part of his mind shut down, replaced by pure rage. He shot Ravagers without thinking, without the careful aim he had been taught. He just pulled the trigger again and again until his weapon clicked empty. When it was over, they freed 234 civilians. Most were injured, traumatized, barely alive. Doksu worked frantically to stabilize the worst cases while they waited for evacuation transports. A young Matharan child, no more than 6 years old, looked up at Hana with wide, scared eyes. "Are you monsters too?" the child asked in a trembling voice. Hana knelt down to the child's level. Her armor was covered in blood, her face streaked with smoke and grime. She looked like something from a nightmare. The Coalition war room hummed with tense energy. Holographic displays showed Methara Prime's surface, marking the shrinking zones where civilians still survived. Admiral Velra stood at the center, her crystalline features dim with exhaustion. Around her, officers from a dozen species debated strategy. "We have evacuated 8 million so far," a Threncall admiral reported, "but 12 million remain in contested zones. Our advance has stalled. The Ravagers have adapted to our tactics, another officer added. They know our patterns now. Every evacuation point we establish, they target with overwhelming force. Taemin listened from his position near the wall. He had returned to the fleet for this crucial meeting. After 3 weeks on the ground, he barely recognized himself. His crystalline skin was cracked in places, scars from close calls and hard fighting. He had learned things about war that no Valkyrian should have to learn. Human Commander Minsu stood at the back of the room with his officers. He was a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much. 2 full battalions of human soldiers had arrived with him, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had commanded in real battles. Not just training exercises. We need more time, Admiral Velra said. If we can maintain a defensive perimeter for another month, we can evacuate the remaining civilians in an orderly fashion. We don't have a month, Minsu said quietly. All conversation stopped. The human commander rarely spoke in these meetings, but when he did, people listened. The Ravagers are deploying biological weapons. The holographic display changed, showing satellite imagery of a spreading contamination. Green and brown vegetation was turning black, dissolving into a gray sludge that consumed everything organic. It's an engineered bioweapon, a human analyst named Boram explained. It breaks down organic matter and converts it into a nutrient slurry the Ravagers can absorb. Once it reaches critical mass, it will consume the entire planet's biosphere within weeks. Horror rippled through the room. Admiral Velra's skin flashed white. Can it be stopped? Yes, Boram said, but only with extreme measures. The infected zones need to be sterilized completely. Fire hot enough to break down the molecular structure? You mean orbital bombardment, someone said. Not just bombardment, Boram corrected. Sustained bombardment. Turn the infected areas into glass. It's the only way to ensure complete sterilization. But there are civilians in those zones, Admiral Velra protested. Millions of them. 30 million in uninfected zones, Minsu said. If we don't act, all 30 million die when the bioweapon spreads. If we sterilize the infected zones now, we lose about 2 million but save 28 million. The room erupted in argument. Coalition officers refused to consider such brutal math. The loss of 2 million lives was unacceptable. There had to be another way. They just needed more time to think, to plan, to find a solution that did not require them to become monsters. Taemin watched Minsu's face. The human commander showed no emotion, but his jaw was tight. He had already done the calculations, already accepted the terrible truth. Sometimes there were no good choices, only choices that saved the most lives. After 2 hours of debate, Admiral Velra made her decision. We will not authorize orbital bombardment of civilian areas. Instead, we will accelerate evacuation efforts in the uninfected zones and establish a quarantine perimeter around the infection. Perhaps our scientists can find a cure. Minsu nodded slowly. He did not argue. He simply gathered his officers and left the room. Taemin followed them. He found the humans in a small briefing room studying maps and making plans. You're going to do it anyway, Taemin said. Minsu looked at him. Yes. But Admiral Velra refused to authorize it. I know, Minsu said calmly. But authorization or not, it needs to be done. The humans will carry this in. We're used to it. I don't understand, Taemin said, though part of him did. You would disobey direct orders? Accept responsibility for millions of deaths? Someone has to, Minsu replied. Your people want to keep your hands clean, maintain your principles. That's admirable. But principles don't save lives when the enemy uses biological weapons. So we'll do what needs to be done. We'll be the monsters this one time so you don't have to be. Jae-won stepped forward. There's another part to the plan. After the bombardment, the firestorm will make the atmosphere temporarily breathable but superheated. We can drop through that window and reach the survivors in the uninfected pockets before the fire spreads to them. That's insane, Taemin said. The heat alone would kill you. The atmospheric conditions, 90% casualties expected, Hana interrupted. She stood with her team, already preparing their equipment. But 10% of us might make it. And if we make it, we can save those 28 million people. Taemin looked around the room. Every human was preparing to drop into hell itself. They knew the odds. They understood that most of them would die. But they were going anyway because millions of civilians needed someone willing to pay that price. I'm coming with you, Taemin said. No, Minsu said firmly. "This is a human operation. We won't force coalition soldiers to—" "You're not forcing me," Taman interrupted. "I'm volunteering. After everything I've seen, everything you've taught me, I can't stand by and watch. If you're willing to die for those civilians, then so am I." Minsu studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Welcome to the drop." Over the next 6 hours, 200 coalition soldiers from various species volunteered to join the operation. They came quietly, without fanfare, knowing they were disobeying orders. They came because they had fought alongside humans and learned that sometimes principles meant nothing without action. Officer Yunji found Tai Min as he was boarding the dropship. Her crystalline features were tight with emotion. "You don't have to do this," she said. "Let the humans handle it. That's what they're good at." "That's exactly why I have to do it," Taemin replied. "The humans are willing to sacrifice themselves for us. For species they barely know. The least we can do is stand beside them." The orbital bombardment began at midnight. Coalition ships, following Minsu's orders without official authorization, fired precision strikes on the infected zones. The impacts were massive, turning entire regions into seas of flame. Taemin watched from the dropship and felt sick. 2 million people lived in those zones. Now they were ash, but 28 million would live. That was the terrible mathematics of war. 30 seconds to drop, Youngmi called from the cockpit. The pilot's voice was steady, despite flying into conditions that should have been impossible. The dropship shook violently as it entered the superheated atmosphere. The external temperature gauge climbed higher and higher. The hull began to glow red. Inside, soldiers checked their gear one last time. Many of them were writing final messages to loved ones just in case. Taemin sat next to Hana. She was calm as always, but he saw her hands tremble slightly as she checked her rifle. Even humans felt fear. They just refused to let it stop them. "If we don't make it," Taemin started to say. "We'll make it," Hana interrupted. "Some of us anyway." "That's enough." The dropship punched through the firestorm and emerged into a nightmare landscape. Everything was burning. The sky was red and black with smoke. The ground was covered in ash and molten glass. And somehow, impossibly, they were still flying. "Landing zone ahead," Youngmi announced. "Hold on, this is going to be rough." The dropship hit the ground hard. The landing gear collapsed on one side, tilting the craft. The back ramp dropped and superheated air rushed in. Taemin felt his skin crack from the heat, but he ran out with the others. They had landed in a city that had been protected by a mountain range from the worst of the firestorm. But the fires were spreading fast. They had maybe 30 minutes before this zone became uninhabitable. "Split up," Minsu ordered. "Find survivors and get them to the evacuation points." "Go," teams scattered in all directions. Taemin ran with Hana's squad toward a residential sector. The heat was unbearable. His crystalline body was not designed for this. Cracks spread across his skin, leaking fluid, but he kept moving. They found a shelter where hundreds of civilians were trapped. The entrance had collapsed during the bombardment. Kyung-soo placed charges to clear the debris while Dok-soo prepared to treat injuries. Behind them, the firestorm advanced. Taemin could see the wall of flame consuming everything in its path. They had minutes, not hours. The charges blew, clearing the entrance. Civilians poured out, coughing and scared. There were so many of them. Too many to evacuate in time. "This way," Hana shouted, leading them toward the evacuation point. But more shelters were being discovered. More civilians emerging. Thousands of them, all needing rescue. Youngmi brought the damaged dropship in low. "I can take 200, she called. "That's it. Choose fast, 200 out of thousands." "Impossible math. Children and injured first," Minsu ordered. "Everyone else will have to wait for the next transport." But everyone knew there would not be a next transport. Not in time. The firestorm was too close. Taemin watched soldiers helping civilians board the dropship. Human soldiers were giving their seats to aliens. They knew they were choosing to die so others could live, and they did it without hesitation. Hana pushed a Metheran mother and child onto the dropship. "Go," she ordered. 6 months had passed since Methara Prime. The war with the Ravagers was over. The Coalition had pushed them back through brutal, costly campaigns that bore little resemblance to the peaceful military operations of the past 3 centuries. The enemy had been defeated, driven from Coalition space and forced into negotiations. The galaxy had peace again. But it was a different kind of peace, purchased with blood and sacrifice. Taemin stood on the balcony of his family home on Velkara, looking out at the crystal forests that grew in the valleys below. His homeworld was beautiful and untouched by war. The people here celebrated the great victory without understanding what it had cost. He barely recognized the person he had been before Mathera Prime. That young officer had believed in protocols and procedures, in diplomatic solutions and careful planning. That person had never seen what real war looked like, never understood that sometimes survival required becoming something you feared. His skin was permanently scarred now. Crystalline structures had been shattered in the heat of that terrible day, and they had healed incorrectly, leaving dark patterns across his body. Other Valkyrians stared at him sometimes, uncomfortable with these visible reminders of violence. A chime announced a visitor. Admiral Velra entered the balcony, her movements slower than Tai Min remembered. She had aged decades in the past 6 months, the weight of command leaving its mark. "Commander," she greeted him formally. "Admiral," he replied. They stood in silence for a moment, looking out at the peaceful landscape. Finally, Velra spoke. "The Coalition Command has asked me to lead a review of our military training programs. They want to incorporate what we learned from the war." She paused. "They want to incorporate human methods. And how do you feel about that?" Taemin asked. Conflicted, she admitted. Her crystalline features shifted through complex colors. "We won the war by learning from the humans. By adopting their brutal efficiency, we saved billions of lives. But in doing so, we became something we never wanted to be. Did we have a choice? That's the question I cannot answer," Velra said quietly. "Were we right to ask the humans to fight for us? Were we right to learn from them? I watch the news feed celebrating our great victory, and all I can think about is the cost. The 60,000 coalition soldiers who died, most of them human, they paid the price for our survival." Taemin understood. The guilt sat heavy on all coalition leadership. They had asked the humans to do terrible things, to bear the weight of sins that others refused to carry, and the humans had done it without complaint, had sacrificed themselves for species they barely knew. "They're leaving today," Tai Min said. "The human contingent. Their contracts are complete." "I know. I came to ask if you would accompany me to see them off." They traveled to the orbital spaceport together. The human transport ships were already docked, loading equipment and personnel. Taemin saw familiar faces in the crowd. Jae-won, supervising the loading with his characteristic efficiency. Doksu, checking medical supplies one last time. And Hana standing apart from the others, looking out at Velkara below. Taemin approached her. She turned and smiled slightly. The burns she had suffered had healed, but she moved more carefully now, injuries leaving their mark. "Commander," she greeted him. "Came to see us off?" "I had to," Taemin said. "After everything we went through together, I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye." "Goodbyes are hard," Hana acknowledged. She looked back at the planet. "Beautiful world you have here, peaceful. Will you go back to Earth and find peace?" Taemin asked. "After what you've done, what you've seen?" Hana considered the question carefully. "We'll try. Humans are good at compartmentalizing. We'll go home, try to be normal again. Some of us will succeed, others—" She trailed off, but Taemin understood. Some wounds did not heal. Jae-won joined them, carrying a small container. "Taemin! Good to see you mobile. Doksu wasn't sure you'd recover fully from those burns." "Your medic is skilled," Taemin said. "He saved many lives." "He's saved mine more than once," Jae-won replied. He handed Taemin the container. "For you. Thought you might want this." Inside was a combat knife. Not the standard issue coalition blade, but a human one. The handle was worn from use, the blade marked with scratches and stains. It had seen real combat. "I can't accept this," Taemin protested. "You already earned it," Jae-won said. "You dropped through fire with us. You chose to stand and fight when you could have stayed safe. That makes you one of us." Doksu appeared, his medical kit slung over his shoulder. He nodded to Taemin with respect. "You did good work down there, Commander. Saved a lot of lives." "Not as many as we lost," Taemin said quietly. "Never is," Doksu replied. "But we save who we can. That's all anyone can do." Admiral Velra approached the group, her posture formal and stiff. She stopped in front of Jae-won and did something no coalition officer had ever done before. She bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in Valkyrian culture. "Lieutenant Jae-won, Sergeant Hana, Medic Doksu, on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I must ask you something." She straightened, her crystalline features showing colors of shame and uncertainty. "Were we right? Were we right to ask you to fight our war? To do things we refuse to do ourselves? Jaewon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured and thoughtful. You didn't ask us to fight your war, Admiral. You asked us to help you protect innocent lives. There's a difference. We chose to use our skills, our experience, in service of that goal. No one forced us. But we used you, Velra insisted. We used your capacity for violence because we refused to develop our own. We kept our hands clean by letting yours get bloody. Maybe, Jaewon acknowledged. But consider what you gave us in return. You showed us that our capacity for violence isn't inevitable. The Coalition built a civilization on hope, mercy, and peace for 300 years. That's something humanity has never achieved. That's beautiful. That's harder than anything we've ever done. Hana stepped forward. Humans have spent 10,000 years fighting each other. We got very good at it. So good that we nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. We learned to control our nature out of necessity. But she gestured to encompass the Coalition. You built something better from the start. You proved that civilization doesn't have to be forged in blood. Don't lose that because of us. But how can we maintain that ideal now? Velra asked. We've learned how to fight. We've discovered our own capacity for violence. How do we prevent ourselves from becoming what we fought? The same way humans do, Doksu said. You remember. You remember the cost, the sacrifice, the horror. You teach your children what war really means, not the sanitized version. And you make sure everyone understands that the ability to fight and the choice to fight are different things. Commander Minsu approached the group, his gray eyes serious. Admiral, the Coalition asked us to teach you how to fight like humans. But that's only half the lesson. The other half is learning when not to fight. Learning restraint. That's the harder part, and it's what separates warriors from murderers. He turned to address Taemin directly. You dropped through fire with my soldiers. You stood beside them when you could have stayed safe. That took more courage than most people have. Use that experience to teach others, not just how to fight, but why we fight, and more importantly, why we stop. The boarding call sounded throughout the spaceport. The humans gathered their equipment and began moving toward their transports. Taemin watched them go, these strange warriors who had taught the Coalition such terrible and necessary lessons. Before boarding, Hana turned back one last time. Taemin, one more thing. Yes? We didn't teach you to be monsters. We taught you that monsters can choose to be protectors instead. Remember that difference? Then she was gone, disappearing into the transport with the others. Within the hour, the human ships departed Velkaran space, heading back to Earth and whatever peace they could find. Timon returned to his duties as an instructor at the Coalition Military Academy. He had been given a new assignment, developing curriculum that incorporated both human tactical methods and Coalition ethics. It was challenging work, trying to balance effectiveness with morality. His first class consisted of 200 young officers from various species. They were eager, fresh-faced, untouched by war. They had read reports about the Ravager conflict, but they did not truly understand. Taemin began the course by showing them footage from Mathara Prime. The violence, the sacrifice, the humans doing terrible things for necessary reasons. He showed them the boarding of the Radiance, where Velkarian security teams retreated according to protocol, while human soldiers advanced into certain death. He showed them the processing pens and the rescue operations. He showed them the orbital bombardment and the impossible drop through fire. The students watched in horror. Several had to leave the room. Others sat in shocked silence. This was not the clean, heroic war they had imagined. When the footage ended, Taemin spoke. The horror isn't that humans can fight like this. The horror is that any of us can, if pushed far enough. Humans just knew it already. They had already fought their worst wars against themselves and learned to control it. When we needed them, they didn't teach us to be monsters. They taught us that monsters can choose to be protectors instead.